Hey there, welcome to Analytics Live. In today's live, I'm going to do a demo of my new 404 No More service. I had to confirm sound. So I'm going to be doing a demo of my 404 service. And after the demo, I'm going to answer questions that people have asked about the service. So even if you can't attend the live, afterwards, I'm going to create jump links to each of the questions so that you can fast forward to a particular question. So without further ado, let me jump into the first dashboard. As a client, you wouldn't actually see this part, but this is the main dashboard that everyone has access to. There are different tiers, like there's a DIY, do-it-yourself tier, there's an expert tier where you provide the rules for the redirects, and then there are two consulting tiers, so consulting and a consulting plus. The consulting plus just gives you updates. I think it's like 3 updates over the course of a year, but everyone has access to this dashboard. Then I built a consulting only dashboard, which we'll jump into after I cover this dashboard. So after I do a crawl, or you provide the crawl data, I plug it into this dashboard. And what this dashboard does is it takes a subdomain and it breaks your site down by directories. And so this visualization is called a tree map. It's really helpful with hierarchical data. I'll also show another visualization that I like to use for hierarchical data that is in the consulting dashboard. But let's focus on the tree map dashboard. Let me get my glasses so I can see better. So what we have here is I ran a crawl of toms.com, their main subdomain, their www. One, because I really like the brand, and I like their purpose. I like how they help disadvantaged people. And then it also ended up being a really clean site in terms of architecture. So I was like, this is a great site to do a demo with because their top level directories are regional. So they're like, as you can see, ENUS, ENGB, FRBE, FRLU, FRCA. So it's also not just English. It's they cater to quite a few regions. Then, as I started digging into the data, there were some fascinating discoveries I made that were across directories. So but one thing kind of added onto the other, and it really just made it an ideal site. For the most part, it's a very clean site in terms of 404s, but there were certain directories, as we'll touch on in a minute, that were more impacted by broken URL. So at a high level, what you can do with a tree map is each of these directories or subdirectories in GeekSpeak, these are called nodes. So this is the main node. This is the whole www subdomain. And if you hover over it, then you get some contextual information, which you can see total URLs, 14,951. So just under 15,000 URLs. And overall, they're they only have a 3%. I don't know. Only 3% of their URLs are broken. And by broken, I don't mean just 404, but even though I called this a 404 no more, that was just because it was kind of catchy. It's basically any status code that starts with a 4 or a 5. So 404, 410, 500s, 503, etc. So at a high level, if you hover over any node, you can see the percent broken URLs. This is a contrived metric that I calculated. I mean, this is primarily built on Python and then JavaScript for the front end, which gives you a lot of like the jazz hands effects. And if you hover over any node, you can see that percent broken, but you also have a visual cue by how dark the node is. So if you see a node that's darker, that's a visual indicator that there's a higher percentage of broken URL. So if I hover over the FRCA directory, you can see, okay, this has a higher percentage of broken URLs than, let's say, the NLBA directory. And this is a very clean node here. The NLBE, the products directory, it only has 2 broken URLs. And these, if you see like small squares, those are individual pages. Obviously, if an individual URL is broken, it's going to show as 100% broken. But if I hover over products, I'll see it's 15% broken. Not terrible, but pretty concentrated. But this collections directory is 23% broken. So that's almost a quarter of the pages in this directory are broken. If we come over here to the ENUS collections directory, this had the highest percentage of broken URLs. This came in hot at 28%, so a little more than a quarter of their pages are broken, so on and so forth. Then what I like to do with these dashboards that I build using Python, which I really kind of transitioned to, I build almost all my dashboards now in Python. I do really love Tableau, and I still have some Tableau clients, but and it's an excellent dashboard tool, as is Looker, not Looker Studio. Any dashboard tool that doesn't let you do statistical analysis, anyway, I won't go into that, but it's just not worth my time. But one thing I like to do with these interactive dashboards is have a visualization that you can drill down into and then have a table that is responsive to the visualization. That's really important to me because typically people who are upper management, they're really more concerned about this 100-foot view, whereas the practitioners, they want to drill down into these directories and look for other patterns. Case in point, when I was looking at this, like it's still at this 100-foot view, I noticed that there were a lot of these nodes that looked like perfect squares, but they had a higher concentration of broken URLs, but they were consistent across these regional directories. So when I hover over, I can see, it's contact us. Let's hover over this one, contact us, contact us. They're all 50%. This is not data that I made up. This is their actual crawl data. Now, when we get to the consulting dashboard, because that includes other metrics like sessions, revenue, clicks, impressions, that is made up data because it was a little too risky to make up data for an actual site. So this I was very curious about. I'm not going to click into it. I could click into it, but I wanted to show what I discovered. So if I go into this table here and I search for contact us, and when you search the table, not only does it filters all of these columns. You won't see that with the other dashboard by design. But when I search for contact us, I see across these international subdirectories, there's this contact us directory and a very high concentration of 404s. Now, in this table, this is only surfacing broken URLs. And the reason for that is that it is surfacing redirect recommendations. And when you look at the redirect recommendations, just a little bit of background about that is I was curious. I was working with a client and they were really trying to get in front of their 404s. And I thought, you know what? I bet I could use AI to make smart redirect recommendations, because if you've worked in SEO, or you've hired an SEO, or you've hired an SEO agency, you've probably been in this situation where someone runs across the site and they give you either a Google sheet or an Excel table, and they tell you, here are all of your broken URLs, and they lob this over the fence over to the engineers, and someone tells the engineers, okay, but fix these broken URLs. Well, depending on the size of the site, they could be thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of broken links. So that is a very tall order. And like my daughter was working for a very large publisher, and one of her tasks on a monthly basis was to identify, I think it was like 24 pages, and she had to manually find a suitable redirect. Now, this is a large publisher. You would think, like these are the types of clients where they speak at conferences and they're talking about how, oh, we automate this and we do this and, we're doing all these smart things. But the reality is, behind the scenes, it's not unique to this publisher. A lot of SEO teams, I mean, they're really out of their depth. They're like, they're trying to stem these leaks that are overwhelming, and so that was also part of the inspiration. I was like, you need a lot more automation and intelligence, for this process. But anyway, so and with that particular publisher, when I ran, or when my daughter ran their site through the 404 No More tool, one of the patterns we found with them is that, and it was very strange, I don't know if this is unique to that particular publisher or what, but there were all these broken URLs where the publish date was 1 day off. So I don't know if they published the URL, they published the article, these were specific to article pages, and then they republish it the next day. I don't know what it was, but the tool was finding these actual URLs to recommend as redirects, and they don't always recommend, the tool doesn't always recommend content pages. So if it finds a URL that's a suitable redirect, I actually classify the page type and I consider that, okay, that's a content page. If it doesn't find a suitable URL to redirect to, then in this particular case for the demo, I did have one layer of logic, and then if that, which we'll touch on in a minute, and if that also didn't return true, then it takes the keywords from the URL and generates a search results page. So it's basically like a smart 404 page. Again, we'll touch on that more in a minute. So let's get back to put our detective hats back on. In this particular case, what I noticed across these domains is that their claim URLs, they're all broken, except for in the ENCA directory and the ENUS. Across their site, someone took their claim pages, so this WSIB claim and this warranty claim page, and moved them outside the Contact Us directory. And that's what you see. This is 2 pages of this. Well, a page and some change. So that was an interesting discovery. And without having this 100-foot view, it would have been very difficult to make that discovery, because without a visualization like this, you're basically just looking at pages and pages and pages of broken URLs, and if this had been an Excel sheet, like, we might be able to sort, have the 404s first and then the 500s, something like that. But typically there's not much more that you get besides that. So that would have been very, very difficult to see. So that was the first discovery I made. The other discovery I made, and and that was just from spending a lot of time going through the URLs, and like filtering the table, and things like that. But another discovery I made is that there were a lot of these URLs that ended with /undefined. And you see that even in the first search results page of their broken URLs. But if I do a search for undefined, undefined, you see that there were quite a few of these URLs. And when I pulled them up, there just wasn't, I mean, obviously it was a 404 page, so there really is no value to it, but I'll just pull one up as an example. It's just product not found. So I don't know what is causing these URLs to be generated, but I thought this is a perfect example to use as maybe a rule where you want to identify these pages before the crawl data even hits the suggestion engine, because I don't want the tool, like when I was looking at the redirect recommendations, they weren't valuable. They because they were trying to find another URL that had undefined. And anyway, so it actually did make some good recommendations, but I thought this is still a good example to use for why you might want certain rules to be for your data to go through, like, imagine like a data pipeline, and we want it to go through this pipeline before it hits the suggestion engine. So I just created a rule that said, if the URL ends with /undefined, then redirect it to the homepage for that particular region. So I didn't want them to just go to the ENUS page, which is like their default page. If it was in the Germany directory, I wanted it to go to its homepage. So okay, and let's see what else. Oh, if the suggestion engine didn't find a suitable redirect, and a lot of these, they were they were, I really had to kind of tweak the intelligence. So like, I really focused on using natural language processing, but this is not something that you just like kind of plug into your data and it's good to go. You have to build custom dictionaries that are unique to that particular site at times, especially if it has like a unique domain of information. And in this particular case, I wanted to lemmatize the keywords. So what I wanted to do was look at the important directories in the URL, extract the keywords, get the lemmatized version of the keywords, which is essentially like distilling keywords down to like a single keyword. So for example, shoe and shoes would show up as shoe. so that it just makes the suggestion engine more intelligent, because if you don't use natural language processing, then one URL might be very closely related to another URL, but one uses collections and the other one uses collection, and then those aren't considered a match. And so, but then it also required some tweaking and some like normalizing. I won't get into all of that, and some of it is proprietary. But when I talk about using AI, I didn't use generative AI. You don't need generative AI for a task like this. But natural language processing was prime. So this is mostly built on natural language processing and a lot of automation, a lot of if-then statements. Excuse me. So what it does is it just takes the main keywords. So I didn't want to include the domain, and in this particular case, I made a rule, and initially the ENCA, the language country pair did show up in the base keywords, but eventually, that just added a lot of junk in the trunk. So I just made a rule that that when it was looking for an acceptable URL, like a redirect URL, it had to stay within the language country pair. So it had to stay within that regional directory. And then that enabled me to kind of clean up the base keywords column. But you can see here, it took collections, kids, hats, and beanies, and reduced it down to collection, kid, hat, beanie. And with natural language processing, I mean, these are dictionaries. And when I talk about dictionaries, I'm not talking about like Webster's dictionary. I'm talking, it's a Pythonic term. It's like basically structured markup. They're just dictionaries that have been built probably 30 plus years ago, where like librarians were, they volunteered time, like a whole bunch of people volunteered time to create these massive dictionaries that identified and like identified keywords that were related semantically. And so we can take advantage of those dictionaries. So then what it does is it says, okay, then take all of the URLs that return a 200 status code and extract, convert them to the base keywords, then do the matching. But if it doesn't find a match, take the original keywords that were in the URL and search for those. Because like, I worked with one e-commerce site. They had a lot of running shoes. Well, you don't want a search results page that searches for run shoe. It would look weird. And typically for most sites, these search results pages are, they surface the actual keywords. So anyway, so, and then I just identify, okay, this is a search results page. So if you wanted to filter for just search results pages, you can search for search. You can also search by status code. And anyway, so if I wanted to, I could drill down to a particular directory. I could even drill down to a particular URL. So, and you have these visual cues when you drill down to a directory. First of all, you have these breadcrumbs. Those were a major pain to add in. But with these tree maps, you can actually move back up the hierarchy by clicking on the node, but it's not terribly intuitive. So that's why I added these breadcrumbs to help with that. But if you do click into a particular node, that then filters the table. So and it specifically filters this column, the URL column. So you'll see I'm in the ENUS node. Here's another visual cue that this is the ENUS node. And you'll see here, even if I change the sort, I am only looking at URLs, broken URLs in the ENUS directory. If I then drill down to, let's say, the products directory, then the table will update accordingly. So, okay, that's enough about that. Then you can, always move back up to that top level. Moving on to the dashboard for consulting clients. This one I was really excited about, just because I've been that practitioner, and a lot of times, when you have a lot of 404s, you kind of have to prioritize the fixes. Now, with this tool, the final deliverable, although clients do get access to the dashboard, obviously, the final deliverable isn't the dashboard. It's actually, it takes all of these rules, once the client has signed off on the recommendations, it takes all the rules and distills them down to actual redirect rules that then you can hand off to your engineering team. And then the onus is on them to figure out the cascading order of the redirect rules, because the way redirect rules work is they are processed sequentially. So a rule that is at the top of the stack, as soon as that returns a true, the redirect is generated. And so if you have a redirect rule that's lower in the stack, it's not going to see it. So your team still has to really think through, what do they want that stack to look like. Oh, there is one other thing I'll add here. So one of my biggest complaints, I do a lot of AI strategy for AI apps. That's really where my focus has been in the past couple years. And one of my biggest complaints is that there's too much of an assumption that, like, their tool is so intuitive, they don't have to provide additional instructions. So in these tools that I'm building, it's really important to me to provide these these tooltips that give you tips. Like, I don't want them just sitting on top of the directory. Like, initially I had them here, but then once you get used to the dashboard, now you just have a lot of text and stuff. So that's why I used a tooltip. But I have suggestions. I have a very high level of transparency. So I talk about the methodology in the overview section, just so clients really understand what they're looking at. But then you also have these tips that you can use. So, and then I also have them here in the consulting dashboard. Okay, so what I envision for the consulting dashboard is the ability for clients to take any kind of URL specific data. So I just used as examples impressions, clicks, sessions, revenue, internal links, and inbound links. So of course you can have click-through rate. I mean, you can have whatever you send. And one of the points that I've made, knowing how intimidating a lot of these data tasks are, you don't have to marry up the data with your landing page or your URL data. We will do that for you. So you can just, send us 5 or 6, CSVs or Excel files or Google Sheets, whatever you're most comfortable with, where you have the URL and whatever data point that you have included. So you might have URLs and sessions. You might have another uh, Excel sheet that has, your inbound links, and then you might pull internal links data from either an SEO tool or Search Console or something like that. And then we'll go ahead and marry them up. We'll talk with your team about things like how do you want to treat nulls, which is just geek speak for a blank cell, and things like that. But the thing that I envisioned is being able to shoehorn the equivalent of, this is probably the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe 20 plus visualizations into a very simplified dashboard by offering the ability to, excuse me, getting over the flu, to select the metric that you want for your x-axis. So this is obviously specific to the bubble chart. The bubble chart is just a scatter plot that also adds in a size dimension. So let's say we want clicks along the x-axis, sessions along the y-axis, and you typically want your what we call in the data science world your dependent variable. So you typically want your independent variable on the x-axis, your horizontal axis, and the dependent variable on your y-axis. So what do I mean by that? I mean, your x-axis should have something where you want to see how does this particular metric impact the metric that's on your y-axis. So so like your x-axis might be, let's say, impressions, and your y-axis is sessions. So we have this impression data, but we want to see, okay, is there like a clear impact on the sessions, or is there a clear impact on revenue, or what have you? But you don't want to mix those up. So, and then you have this size metric. If your particular team wants the option to not have anything in the size metric, so you want each of your nodes or data points or dots, whatever you want to call them, to be the same size, I could do that. I almost put this live off because I'm still getting over this upper respiratory infection, but we're bumping up against Thanksgiving. And then you could also filter out like status codes. Like if you only wanted to see your broken URLs, you could filter out your 200 status codes. So I'm not going to do that now, but then you can also search by keyword. So if I wanted to only see URLs that contained boots, I could do that. I'm not going to do that initially. So I'm going to update the chart. And now we have impressions on the x-axis, sessions on the y-axis, and revenue is generating the size. So in this particular case, here we have the URL of this make-believe site, funkykicks.com. It should be a site. And it has a status code of 200. Any URL that has a status code of 200 or 3XX is orange. Any status code that starts with a 4 or a 5 is red. So immediately, excuse me, we can see, okay, yeah, it makes sense that the homepage generates a significant amount of revenue. But here we have this URL. This is the sneakers subdirectory. It's generating a 500 status code, but it has driven a fair amount of revenue. So what does that mean? That means like I might want to go back to the other dashboard and filter by that sneakers subdirectory and see what it's recommending, because something that generates a fair amount of revenue, or maybe it has like a high number of inbound links, you might want to have a white glove test, so excuse me, that was the impetus for this particular chart. But a lot of times you have, this is very, very common, where you have URLs that pull away from the pack, but depending on how divergent they are, like how much of an outlier they are, it might cause the rest of your data to be kind of clustered in a way that makes analysis difficult. So I added the functionality to be able to zoom in on particular data points. So maybe I wanted to, at this point, really just focus on broken URLs. Oh, okay, now I can see relatively this particular page, super funky converse 5276.html. It's driven a fair amount of revenue, fair amount of sessions, but it's broken. Or I might look at this and this generates all kinds of questions, because this hasn't engendered a high number of impressions or sessions, but it's generated a high amount of revenue. So that might be worth looking into. Okay, let me let me filter the table here. So if you click on a particular node, it will filter the table below. And now I can see, okay, this has a decent number of inbound links, but very few internal links. I have a client. This is a huge issue. If you want to see, like, basically think of it as a popularity contest, where you're looking at, okay, what are the pages on our site that are most popular or most valuable to outsiders, then you can look at the inbound links. But a lot of times, there is a disconnect between inbound links and internal links. And this exemplifies that, even though this is contrived data, this is extremely common. So for a URL like this, not only do we want to make sure that this is a solid redirect, this is worth, like, if I were a practitioner for this site, I would also want to include this in a report to upper management. Like, you know what, we need to point more internal links at this page, because it generates a fair amount of revenue, even with being the redheaded stepchild of the site. Again, very, very common. If you want to clear the filter, you can do that here. I'm going to add the 200 status codes back in, and here I'll actually change this to internal links, inbound links, and let's look at clicks for size. So again, here we have a very common situation where we have this particular page. This is the same page. Let me find another one. The sneakers page. Let's see. Here we have a random page. Is a 404 page, but has a lot more inbound links than internal links. Okay, then if I wanted to filter more by, let's say, boots, I could do that. Now, every URL I'm looking at has boots in it. So again, there are just a lot of different ways that you can, this is like basically data modeling on the fly, sort of. Okay, moving down to the section that is dedicated to specifically the analysis of broken URLs. So this is an analysis of all URLs. And this is an analysis of specifically the broken URLs. This particular metric picker, I just love being able to give clients the ability to filter and switch out their metrics. Even like with Tableau dashboards I build, I mean, I always, with extremely rare exception and under duress, like if a client's like, we don't really care about filters, I'm like, probably, that's probably not true for your practitioners, but okay. But for the vast majority of dashboards I build, I am providing some kind of picker for the metrics, variables, whatever you want to call them, and then lots and lots and lots of filters. So here it defaults to sessions for this particular site, and this sunburst chart here, it just gives you like a high level view of just like your top 3 directories. And that's just because if you, let's say you're a site that has 10 directories deep, this is just going to get either so the text is so small it's not readable, or it becomes just a ginormous visualization. So what you can do here is, if you hover over it, it will give you a count of the broken URLs and whatever metric you choose. So if I switch this to revenue, not only is revenue going to determine the color of the node, it's also going to be visible on hover. But if you want all of the metrics, you always have the table below. But if you click on it, now the table is responsive to whatever you click on. And sorry, I live in New York City and they're always doing some kind of construction. So hopefully my microphone is filtering out some of the noise. Excuse me. But, and if I click on another node, it's going to filter more. With this bar chart here, it gives you a similar view of your data, but there are no limits on the number of subdirectories. Since I was creating this, I only created 3 subdirectories deep, because even with using AI, it still took a lot of time and effort to do that. Oh, one thing I will say, going back up here, is if you want to filter, like remove a filter, you have that clear filter, or you can just like reset the axes, and you have that option over here as well. Okay, so now if I click on kids, it's going to filter by kids. But if I come over here and I click on accessories, now I'm in the accessories directory, and then I can just continue to drill down and drill down. And so even if this was like 10 or 20 directories deep, you would have these breadcrumbs that would allow you to either inch your way back up the hierarchy or just go all the way to the top level. The value here is, this is only surfacing directories. That's how these visualizations stay clean. And you can move back up by either clicking in the this is called a sunburst chart here, or the bar chart. Now let's look down here. We have the same options we had with the other, so I'll just show I'll just do one quick demo here. Whatever you type in, it's going to highlight. I started doing this because some of the dashboards that I build, especially when it comes to like the AI strategy for AI apps, uh, I build out these interactive dashboards, but a lot of times a particular cell, it might have like a paragraph of content. And and so I want the keyword to be highlighted. In this particular case, it's not quite as important, but it can still be helpful. Now, this particular filter, it only works on the URL column and the status code column, and that's by design, because if I put in 404, initially when I first created this, because normally I have the filters work on all columns, but in this particular case, I was getting URLs that were not pertinent to 404s, and it didn't make sense. So I just restricted the search to URL and status code. Excuse me. But this is a consulting dashboard. So, there are features that are built in, but if the team is like, oh, you know what, we also want to be able to have sliders to set like a minimum number of impressions or a minimum, amount of revenue. I realize my candle is probably contributing to my coughing. Anyway, then those can be added in, obviously at a cost. But this particular table, this just helps with being able to get that view of like your broken URLs. Again, this is an analysis specifically of the broken URLs, but with your actual metrics. And if you've ever done an analysis like this, being able to see some of the metrics that upper management cares most about, like they're really going to zero in on this revenue column. Obviously that's helpful for their team, but for SEO practitioners to be able to, demonstrate things like disconnects between inbound links and internal links, especially if that particular URL generates high revenue or high, like a high number of sessions or something like that, it's going to be easier to get that buy-in from upper management to start to look at things like, how can we point more internal links at our URLs? And one thing I will say, just give this away for free. If you are a publisher site, I have seen so many, and I don't mean this as I don't mean to criticize people. I will critique processes, but one thing I've seen, having worked with a lot of internal SEO teams, is a lot of times upper management will have them spinning their wheels on all of these tasks that have little to no impact. Case in point, I won't say what the site was, but I know someone who worked for a particular publisher, and the person who led their SEO team got this wild hair to do this full analysis of structured markup for severe weather. And this person, they wanted like a competitive analysis. They wanted to see which of their competitors were, using structured markup for severe weather, and who was doing it well, what ideas they could get from competitors. And the person who did this analysis was like hardly anyone uses this structured markup. And I told this person, because we were just having a conversation, I said, well, there's a good reason for that. It's because Google doesn't use that structured markup. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't, structure the data on your website where you can. But Google does let sites know the actual structured markup that they don't always award with SERP decorations, some some kind of extra something in the search results pages, uh, but they use it, and so you at least qualify for one of these SERP decorations. So maybe it's a preview of a recipe. It's a preview of a video, whatever it is. They have certain categories that for structured data that they actually use. But now if you look at the number of categories and subcategories and subcategories that you can apply structured data to, I mean, it's almost endless. And so, were they going to get the most bang for their buck spending all of this time on this competitive analysis? And it's like, well, yeah, your competitors don't care because Google's not using it. And meanwhile, back in Gotham City, and this is so common, especially for publishers, I can honestly say I've yet to see a publisher effectively even focus on their internal linking strategy. Like if they focus on linking at all, it's almost exclusively inbound linking. But if you're a publisher, especially a large publisher, you already have a behemoth of URLs that you have complete control of. Where if you have a page that's particularly important to you, like you don't want to be the cobbler whose kids have no shoes. Like you should be looking at internal linking opportunities. So this particular very, very large publisher was wasting, in my opinion. It was almost like you're putting up new wallpaper in the bathroom while your house is on fire. Like, I just even going to the publisher site, I saw that they had a really significant issue with internal linking. So it's like, here you have someone, excuse me, who has their team, running hither, tither, yon, trying to come up with this strategy for severe weather that it was never going to move the ball forward, except maybe in an AI sense, because AI uses structured markup, but this particular publisher blocks AI. So anyway, but that's very, very common. But a tool like this, part of the reason I created it was to arm practitioners with the information that they need to make a compelling case to fix their URLs, because broken URLs is not just an SEO problem. It's a usability problem. I mean, I've read the statistics range between 70 and 90% of visitors who land on a broken page will leave your site. It doesn't matter if you also offer like a search bar where you try to make it as simple as possible. Part of the reason I typically will default to a search results page is at minimum it does the search for them and surfaces the keywords so that they can just tweak the search. This is particularly effective with e-commerce sites. Like, you have the brand, you might have like Nike men's basketball shoes. Well, there you go. There's your search. And then you can even use query parameters to, tack on, okay, we want the sort of that search results page or SERP to, be sorted by relevance in, ascending order, or price in descending order, or date in descending order, to surface like your most recent pages, particularly if you're a publisher. Or you could even go bonkers and create a dedicated search results page just for your 404s, where you're letting your visitors know, hey, like maybe in a clever way with an image or something, that page is broken, but maybe this will help you. I mean, with something like this, you just let me know, okay, we have all of these rules, and if none of them return true, I want the visitor to go to a search results page using the keywords from the original page, and I want it sorted this way. Or, we created a dedicated search results page, and it has, like a section with information. So sorry, that we don't have that page, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, okay, so that covers the demo portion. Now what I'm going to do is just answer questions maybe that people have asked when inquiring about the service, or questions that people have submitted, and also the questions from the chat, if there are any questions. One thing that's helpful is if you have a question and you're attending live, just putting the word question in all caps, not the whole question, because then it kind of looks like you're shouting and it can be a little harder to read. But just something that kind of makes your question stand out. So the word question, all caps, or some people use the question mark emoji, whatever works for you. And I will get to those. So one question, where have you been? Okay, so for the past few years, I kind of disappeared, and actually longer than a few years. So going back to 2018, I spent 18 months writing my Making Data Sexy books. I launched both of them. I published both of them in September 2019. I told myself, okay, I was so burnt out, just exhausted. And I was going to give myself till the end of the year to just like recover and focus on all the things that fell by the wayside. And then the beginning of 2020, I was going to, do all the things that you do when you publish a book, speak at conferences, have book signings and things like that. And the last week of December in 2019, I found out that my niece and her little brother were missing, and and it pulled me into this big high-profile criminal case, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. I spent a lot of effort trying to get justice for another family member, and also such a complicated case. I was using a lot of my data analysis for the case. Like I built out a dashboard with like the show, the transcripts of, the shows that covered the case and things like that. I failed in being able to get justice for my brother. And eventually I just had to say, okay, all right, I need to, focus on other things. Let me put this back to, since I don't need the screen. Anyway, so, and so I was really kind of hyper focused on that in 2020, 2021, too focused, way too focused. And then 2022, I decided I'm going back to school for data science. And a few months into the program, I was diagnosed with cancer. So then between 2022, 2023, I was juggling, excuse me, cancer treatment. And then the criminal trial started, being held. Everyone was, well, the two main criminals were brought to justice. And so, like, I just recently passed the point where I was finished with cancer treatment, school, and these criminal trials. And as soon as I finished school, I actually started working on this tool even before I finished school, because I was doing it for a particular client, and then just thought, you know what, I think I can build this out and actually offer this as a service. So that's where I've been. I am in the process. I know, like, I just have to rebuild analytics. I am going to focus quite a bit on AI, not exclusively. I'm also going to be, talking about data analysis and things like that. But it just so happened that I went back to school for data science, really more so I could better understand Python and R. And I had a client that I was working staff aug. So I was like embedded with their analytics team for 3 years. Amazing, amazing, amazing experience. So I wasn't quite as desperate to, focus on analytics. Excuse me. But that particular team, they wanted to start transitioning from Tableau dashboards to Python, and the library that they wanted, it also had an R library, and I actually had a gravitational pull toward R over Python. I know Python is like the belle of the ball, and now I work almost exclusively in Python, SQL, and JavaScript for these tools, and jQuery. But at the time, the thing I didn't like about Python is, like, when you're cleaning up data, everything uses like these, they call it dot notations, where it's like, you have a data frame, which is just geek speak for like a table, and you uses dot notation to filter and then to sort and then all of this stuff. And this is particular to a package called pandas, which you spend a lot of time in pandas. But R had this library called dplyr, and it was so, I mean, for someone who really, really likes structure, and obviously I really like structure, I am a process oriented person. For someone who likes structure, I loved how dplyr, it's like you do one task and then you pipe it into the next task, and it just makes like, yeah, it makes like finding errors or issues in the data much easier. But this particular team, they were like, yeah, that's great, we want Python. And so I was spending all this time, like, learning, uh, really focusing on the charting libraries in Python. And but like, I just would build out these massive, I have so many massive Google Docs, because if I figured something out, I would drop it in a Google Doc, so that if I needed to do that in another dashboard, I could just pull that up. And this is before we had generative AI to help with these tasks. And but a lot of the things that worked, I didn't really know why it worked. I just knew it worked. So I kind of felt like a monkey, just like, okay, I am just going to take this, and then I just have to, play with it until I don't get an error and stuff. But anyway, so that was my intent. But then my first year into the program, ChatGPT was announced, and within months, I was on my first AI project. Okay. Uh, and also, uh, oh yeah. Next question. What was the inspiration for this tool? I actually kind of already talked about that. It's really to empower senior level like decision makers, as well as the practitioners. I just really find that a lot of the practitioners are one against the wind in trying to get things fixed. Um, and even with like kind of transitioning a lot more into AI, I still like it's still like my heartbeat to make data sexy. And when I talk about I make data sexy, it's not a self-aggrandizing claim. It's I make it actionable, like and because I spent so much time in this particular industry, I know the types of things that I would have to do, but I was doing in Excel or Google Sheets or, when I had a client who used Tableau, I was like, oh, at least I can use Tableau and just like, switch out the row and columns and things like that. Um, but how would you see this being applied to a publisher site? Again, I already touched on that. But, one of the nice things, especially for the consulting dashboard, is like I said, you just have an unlimited drill down ability with this particular chart, just because I think a lot of times with publisher sites, I mean, the devil is truly in the details, and so the more moving parts you have, the more critical it is that you have some kind of view of your data that gives you what I call that 100-foot view. If you don't start with that, you're not going to find the details like, huh, they moved their claim forms outside the contact us directory. Okay. Does it work for more than just 404s? I talked about this in the demo. Yes, any status code that starts with a 4 or a 5, it identifies. How does the expert level work? Okay, so with the expert level, that is really designed more for teams where they have like a strong practitioner who, excuse me, like with that particular levels, we're working with like we'll share probably a Google sheet with you, um, where you let us know the rule, how you want the matching to be done, if it's like regex match or contains or exact match, and then the redirect rule. So for this particular, like any URL that's broken that contains, let's say, women's or woman, and Nike, we don't want to leave this to chance. We have a dedicated landing page for women's Nike shoes. So any URL that contains women, uh, Nike, and shoe or shoes, and then that's where you build out these dictionaries. Do you want this to include sneakers? Do you want this to include what other similar terms do you want to include? And then what is that page like? Where do you want someone who searches those terms and would have hit a 404 or 4xx or 5xx page? What page do you want them to go to? And so you get a certain number of those rows, and it's a way that you can save on cost because you're providing the redirect rule. So we're not, sifting through your data, looking for patterns, looking for issues, suggesting, hey, you know what, we noticed that you have this dedicated page for, children's sunglasses. So we recommend that, instead of leaving something to chance, you redirect to this page. Or maybe you want it to go through the suggestion engine, and if it doesn't find a suitable redirect, then you default to this landing page instead of a search results page. Um, if you use your own rules, can you use regex? Absolutely. And if you don't know regex, just search regex Annie Cushing. I did a very simplified post to make regex accessible to non-technical, basically like non-programmers. And there are, for the most part, there are like a couple handfuls of terms that you need to know and kind of get comfortable with, and really a handful that you'll use most of the time. And I go through those kind of in order of importance in from my experience. But then if you get stuck on something, you can drop that in ChatGPT or whatever, Claude, or whatever your AI tool du jour is, and just let it know, hey, here's what I'm trying to match, and here are some example URLs of what I want it to match, and it will give you your regex. Okay. And then in that particular blog post, I share a tool that helps you test your regex. If you're using regex in a tool like Search Console or Google Analytics, then you can just stay inside that tool, because both of those tools allow regex. And so you can test your regex expressions right in the tool. But if you're working in something else, you can, I share a tool that's really, really user friendly to test your regex. Can we provide log data instead of a crawl? Absolutely. And for the non-consulting clients, all I need is the URL, sans query parameters. Query parameters, you don't want a bunch of query parameters unless the query parameter determines unique content. So obviously, if you have a query parameter that's like p equals and it's a page number, you need to update your site. But sometimes you have query parameters that determine unique content, and those should be included. All other query parameters like sort, filters for, the like different facets if you're an e-commerce site, things like that. You don't want those included in this analysis, because when you generate these redirect rules, they're typically going to be generous enough to include URLs that have query parameters. And it also will just add to the URL count, and it's just a mess. So if you don't filter them out, we will. But yeah, so yeah, you absolutely can send us log data. If you're a site that's behind a registration wall or a paywall, something like that, you don't want to give us access, no problem. Just send us the crawl data. Okay, what if we provide analytics data, but some pages from the crawl don't have analytics data? So what they're talking about is, let's say you have 178,000 URLs, but only 120,000, if that, of those URLs have generated at least one visit. If you're using Adobe Analytics, or session if you're using Google Analytics, then what do you want to do with the URLs that maybe they don't have any internal links, or they don't have any sessions, or whatever it is, how would the tool treat that? With the main dashboard, it has no impact whatsoever, because that data is not included, so it's still going to suggest URLs. With the consulting dashboard, by default, I will typically include those are called nulls. So basically, if it's an empty cell, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to replace it with 0? Which is typically what I like to do. Or what is it that you want to do? Regardless of what you decide to do, it will still show up on the dashboard, unless you're like, okay, well, maybe for a little bit extra, we want to include a filter that allows us to either include or exclude null values. Okay, last question from there. Are you going to license this as a tool? So kind of like make it like Screaming Frog or a tool like that. Eventually, most likely, yes. At this point, this isn't plug and play. Like I said, you're using natural language processing, but you have to customize those dictionaries. And a lot of the things that, like I'll eventually automate, as AI, as like AI's agentic abilities. In other words, using AI as an agent, like an independent agent, as those get stronger, but then also just over time with, working with clients, hearing how, like they want to use the data, or, it'd be great is if we also had this other feature and things like that. Over time, I'll have a better idea what's most important. But for now, there are just so many moving parts. And then also, there's the issue of if you don't have someone on your team who knows how to analyze this data, mm, I think it's going to be a little while before AI is at the place where it can completely, you don't need what's called human in the middle for decisions like this. So, yes, that is my hope eventually. But it's a significantly heavy lift, even if we had all of the intelligence available to us. It's a very heavy lift to, take into account all of these different factors and have it be effective. Okay. All right, now I'm going to look and see if there are any questions in the chat, and then we will wrap up. Let's see. Um, let's see. Okay. Um, yeah, mostly comments, everything I agree with. Anyway, okay, so that's a wrap. If you have any questions, you can always email me, Annie@annielytics.com. And if you celebrate Thanksgiving, have a wonderful Thanksgiving break.